Hello and welcome to Who's On Next, the podcast where the only thing we're good at is being consistently inconsistent. Today I have with me a man known for being the voice of Duke Nukem for over 25 years, and also appeared in different Sonic games as the voice of Big the Cat and Omega in Sonic Heroes. Appeared in just tons of things over the last 25 years. It is Jon St. John.
Hey, how's that for consistency? I'm consistent too.
And again, how have you been doing today?
Well, I all things considered in the pandemic and all that crap, I got to say I'm doing fairly well. Thank you for asking, Mr. Edwards. And yourself, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's a bit humid in this room, and my dog is laying down in the shade trying to cool down. But other than that, I think we're good. So,
oh, well, can we establish whereabouts you are? Where in the world are you?
East Coast, southern East Coast. Not Florida, but a couple states around there.
Yeah, somewhere down there where it's always humid and hot in the summer. I'm in the South, also Southern California, where our heat and humidity wave just ended yesterday. I'm proud to say.
Yeah,
thankful to say.
I have a few friends that live in California that have been telling me about how awful it's been down there. So
yeah, we're just not accustomed to humidity. We're big pussies when it comes to the weather, because when it's really nice where you live most of the time, it only takes one day of rain or one day of humidity to really set you off.
Put you in a bad mood, especially when it's early in the morning. I hate waking up early in the morning at like 9, 10 a.m. Doesn't happen very often, but I do wake up sometimes that early. But,
yeah, I don't like to wake up moist either unless it was a wet dream, in which case, I'm fine with that. But humidity, no.
So let's get this started. So I guess in the grand scheme of things, where did you get your start doing voiceover?
Oh, interestingly enough, in the South, in North Carolina, back in 1976 when I was 15 years old. Actually, my first interest was at 14 years old in junior high school. We had a school radio station I played around on. But when I was 15 in North Carolina, I moseyed down one day, just got a wild hair up my ass, went down to the local AM radio station, WJNC, 1240 AM, and told their program director, hey, I'm here for a radio job. And he said, do you have an appointment? I said, no. He said, well, I'll listen to you anyway. And I talked his ear off for a while, and he said, okay, yeah, I'll put you on the air. And that's where it all started for me, with a radio job at a small town, small AM radio station. It was all of 1,000 watts during the day and 250 watts at night. So, we didn't cover a lot of ground, but I had a loyal following of listeners from junior high school, which was pretty cool.
Well, like, what specifically did you do on the radio when you were doing that, at least at that age? Like,
I was a DJ. Yeah, and the format back then, that doesn't exist anymore, but the format back then was called MOR, which meant middle of the road. So I was playing Barry Manilow, ABBA, Engelbert Humperdinck, Firefall. I mean, a pretty eclectic collection of easy-to-listen-to music, and not elevator music. Anne Murray, the Beatles, Andy Gibb, that kind of stuff.
Right,
the Bee Gees. Yeah. So I was a DJ. I was a baby DJ, and I did 2 or 3 weekends on the air when they decided to put me on full time, which was pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah. Back in the day.
What is it like how is it that you had really heard about doing that, or had really been interested in doing that, at least at that age? Because I think I didn't really start getting super into doing voiceover as a full-time thing until I guess around that age, but there wasn't very many venues at that point for me.
My chief influencers were Gary Owens. I don't know if you know that name.
Oh, I love Gary Owens. Yeah.
The G.O. Show.
Yeah.
The late great Gary Owens,
Space Ghost.
Space Ghost, exactly. Now, see, I'm much older than you, so I grew up watching him on the comedy TV show Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. And because I'm from Southern California, I would listen to Gary Owens on the radio, like when he was on KMPC in Los Angeles. And I just thought he was the funniest thing ever, and I loved his voice. So he and comedian George Carlin were the biggest influences on me. In 1975, Carlin had an album called FM and AM, where he had wonderful wino radio, WINO. And I used to imitate his characters on that, and all the kids at school said, God, you sound just like the DJs. You should go be on the radio. And that really is what influenced me. But between listening to George Carlin and Gary Owens, And then when I started doing voice acting, of course, Mel Blanc was my biggest influence there. He and Billy West, actually. And here's the great thing about this industry, by the way. Before he passed away, I became friends with Gary Owens. I met him and became friends. And the same with Billy West. I met Billy West at a convention, and we hit it off because we have similar backgrounds. And as it turns out, when I lived on Cape Cod and I was doing morning radio in the 80s, I was ripping material off from Billy West, who was on WBCN in Boston at the time. I didn't even know who he was, but I was ripping off his material and using it on the radio. And when he and I compared notes at a con a few years ago, we just kind of fell into a friendship because of that commonality.
So what was it, just like comedy bits, like in betweens for the radio, or was it just like?
Oh yeah, morning show character voices and all that kind of stuff. So because for about 45 years I was a radio broadcaster, for a good part of it I was production director, which meant I made all the commercials and promos. But I was also a morning guy, and I was the designated character voice actor for morning shows across the country for a good 20 years or so. And Billy West, same thing. His gig started that way. He was on WBCN in Boston, and then Howard Stern discovered him, and he went on to work with Howard Stern, and that's how Ren and Stimpy came about, and all of the other characters that he eventually did, like Doug and he has so many different characters. Hard for me to name them all. And besides, this interview is not about him. It's about me. So I love you, Billy West, but fuck you. This is about me.
But I guess where did the transition from doing radio into just doing straight voice acting for games and things like that come in?
Well, that started here in San Diego back in 1995 when one of the top casting directors at the time, Lonnie Manella, who still lives here and still casts video games constantly. As a matter of fact, I'm auditioning for her after this interview today. Lonnie was in my studio when I was a production director at a station here in San Diego, then known as KCLX. And she came in to record an automotive dealership commercial. I think it was like John Hine Mazda or something like that, one of the car dealerships that are big here. And while setting up her microphone, she launched into all these crazy, wacky voices that she does. And I thought, well, I don't want to be overshadowed. I'm going to show off too. So I turned on my microphone and started doing a bunch of crazy, wacky voices. And she turned to me and she said, "Wow, you've got a remarkable range. Would you consider voice acting?" And I said, "Well, sure. I'm voice acting every day. That's part of my job." She goes, No, not radio, but in video games." And my response naturally was, this is 1995. I went, voice acting in video? There's no voice acting in video games. She said, "Well, there's about to be, and there's this game that I'd like you to audition for called Duke Nukem 3D if you're interested." And of course I was interested. Sure, I'd like to be in video games. That sounds like an easy and fun gig. And so I landed that gig, and then, the snowball effect happens. One thing after another. Once I was known as Duke Nukem, all the other games just kind of fell at my feet.
Right, yeah, and it's interesting because at the time, video game voiceover was not that high quality at all. Really at all. It was like it was friends of friends, or it was like family members of the producer or something, or just local talent who had never done shit like that. So I just find it interesting that at the time, because even now I think the original Duke Nukem is considered like some of the best voiceover from that era of video games, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. It was kind of a breakout role too, because there were only single little lines in video games prior to that. There wasn't a character who, that you played as a first person who gave you voice as you played. And Duke Nukem was pretty much the first one to do that.
Right, yeah, because a lot of it, I know Atari stuff back then specifically, it was all electronic. Modulation. It wasn't actual human beings doing a lot of voiceover back then.
Mm-hmm.
I think
well, remember when games were on CD-ROM, space for data was so limited.
Oh yeah.
That they couldn't put much into it, and that's why it was all downsampled to 8-bit, and the quality was crap.
Yeah, it was like putting your voice through a walkie-talkie 2 times basically, with a lot of voiceover back then, at least in the modulation era.
Yeah, a lot of compression, a lot of boosting of the high end that was distorted, and it's funny too because as the years went by, and games progressed, and the quality became much better. There were I don't want to call them haters, but you don't sound like Duke at all. That's not what Duke sounds like because the quality of the recording got so much better. It didn't, it didn't have that splashy, shitty high end. And they were saying, "Are you doing the voice the same?" Oh yeah, I've never changed it. Duke has always sounded like this, and he always will. God damn it! But when you go from 8-bit to 16-bit, and the quality improves dramatically, it did change a bit of the I don't know, the texture of the voice somewhat. And gamers were not accustomed to the higher quality stuff from Duke Nukem Forever, and would say, that you're not doing the same voice. Well, yeah, I am, you idiot.
Well, yeah, because back then it was bit crush. Like a lot of voices were, there was still. It's hard to explain. There was still modulation in a way, but it was primarily just how the spacing of the voiceover was done with how much data was actually put into the game, to the point that it still sounded, but the voices still sounded kind of muffled, like back then. Like they still kind of had that sound.
Right. And then, of course, when the quality got better and they started putting in cutscenes, that's when video game voice acting got better. Because instead of a single line, you were acting out a scene. And I love the cutscene stuff. That dramatically improved the quality of the work for voice actors in video games.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, looking back on it now with how big Duke Nukem is, because that's like probably one of the most iconic video game characters of the last 20 something years. And I guess looking back on that now, how does that feel knowing that was the first voiceover gig you got? Just
man,
about that now.
I wish I had known that Duke was anything back in the day, because from 1995 until 2002 or 3, I didn't know that anybody even played the damn game. I had no clue there was any following, or that it was famous, or that anybody, there were any fans of Duke whatsoever until my very first convention appearance invitation came along, which was kind of a coincidence too. As a fella at a con called MagFest in Washington, D.C.,
yeah.
who Brendan Becker is his name. He was the con chair back then. And he said, just for the hell of it, I'm going to reach out to this guy on Facebook and see if he answers, because apparently a whole bunch of the gamers at MagFest had requested, get Jon St. John, get the Duke Nukem guy. And he said, I don't know if I can, but I'll try. So he messages me on Facebook, and I instantly wrote back and went, cool, a convention appearance? Will you fly me out there and pay me and stuff? And he said, well, yeah, we do that. And I'm like, okay, I'm in. And from then on, I mean, the way I was received at MagFest the first time I was there was like I was some kind of superstar. I was a bit taken aback because I didn't know what to expect, but the fans were so cool and seemed to love me unconditionally, and I could fart and make them laugh. I didn't have to say anything witty. I didn't have to prepare anything. I just had to show up, and they loved me unconditionally. And man, from that point on, I knew Duke was something. But isn't it weird that it was, a good 7 years that the game was out, that I didn't have any idea that it was anything, or that there was a following, and which leads to probably the next question that you might ask, because in many interviews they say, what did you do between Duke Nukem 3D and Duke Nukem Forever? How many times did you record? How long did you wait? I didn't even know they were making a game called Duke Nukem Forever. Okay? I'm a voice actor, not a gamer. I don't follow the news of games and such, so I knew nothing until I got a phone call one day, and they said, hey, by the way, it's a cold day in hell. They were referring to a thing on my then website that said, maybe some cold day in hell I'll come back and reprise the role of Duke Nukem. And so that was the first thing they said. Hey, is this Jon St. John? Yes. Hey, it's a cold day in hell. What? Yeah, we're making this game, Duke Nukem Forever. Are you in? Yeah, I'm in. And that was the first I heard about it, was maybe a year before it came out. In 2011, it was released.
Really?
I think in 2010 was when they called me. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I knew nothing.
That's fucking crazy to me, because that game was in development hell for 10 years, I think, at that
Oh,
point.
but see, it wasn't really that, and that's the misconception. People think that game was being worked on for years. No, that game had been completed in 1999 or 2000 and sat on the shelf because the guy in charge had spent his funds. I'm going to try to put this as kindly as I can. He had no money left to bring the game about. And that's when Randy Pitchford from Gearbox went, damn, we got to save this character. And he came in and he bought the rights from 3D Realms and Triptych and took it over. And 2K published it, and it finally got life again. If it hadn't been for Gearbox, Duke Nukem would never have seen the light of day again.
All right, that's crazy to me, because that was like that game in particular was just one of those like video game legends where just everyone just kept thinking it wasn't going to come out because of how long it had been teased for so long.
Right.
Because I think there was like a promotional teaser for it like in 2002 or something like that, and since then they just kept talking about it and delaying it and delaying it and delaying it and saying it was coming out 1 year, and then it finally came out. And it was just, I don't know, it's just crazy to me that it just was such a long process for that game.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the game engine was outdated and the graphics were outdated, and everybody expected it to be on par with like Call of Duty. And there's just no way to do that. This is a game that literally sat on the shelf for 10, 11, 12 years before it was picked up, and Gearbox added very little to it. I think they just cleaned it up a bit and added a little bit of stuff, but for the most part, it was just sitting on the shelf ready to go, but there was no money to publish it or produce it and finish it off until Gearbox came along. So that's how it actually happened. And again, I was clueless the whole time. I didn't know what was going on. They didn't tell me anything. I'm a mushroom, man. They kept me in the dark and fed me shit.
I think it's also, since then, there's been kind of, there were like small Duke things, I think, in between that, but there's been kind of, after that game came out, there was kind of a resurgence, and Duke was appearing in like several more things. Like there was that Bulletstorm DLC that came out a few years ago with the Bulletstorm full clip edition. That
was one of the most fun experiences of video game voice acting in my life, because when Gearbox came to me, I think that was 2016. They called me and they said, hey, we want to insert Duke into this game Bulletstorm. And I was actually familiar with Bulletstorm because my friend Steve Bloom is Grayson in that game. And I kind of followed it a little bit because I wanted to know more about video games at the time. I had a much greater interest around from 2012 to 2016. And when they brought me out to Dallas, I mean, they flew me out there for 2 separate weeks of recording, and they limoed me from the airport. They put me in a 5-star hotel. They fed me the best food. Then they paid me an hourly rate for recording that was up to union scale at that time. So, in other words, I made really good money to work with really nice people in a really good facility, and they treated me like the king. And it was just a great experience for me. I've never felt more respected in my life than when I got to record the full clip edition lines.
I think my favorite thing about that is every time I've seen cutscenes for that game, I love that they didn't change anything about the dialogue except the fact that Duke Nukem's in it. That just kills me every time I watch cutscenes. They never say the name Duke. They never refer to him by Duke.
They call me Gray.
Yeah, no, they still call him by the name of the main character. It's basically just a palette swap, but they actually gave the palette swap new dialogue.
Exactly, but you know why? Obviously, I mean, they paid me plenty of money to come in and record. They couldn't pay all of the other voice actors to come in and change those lines. It was just not financially feasible. And they were also on a timeline. They wanted to release it with Duke in it as quick as they could. Hell, they put it out so fast they hadn't even matched up the lip flap. And that was something that they had to work on later after it had already been released. But there was just no way to get all of the actors in to change those lines. So some of them they made fun of it by having me go, "Why do you keep calling me that? What do you mean Gray? I'm not that old." That kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I guess with another thing I'm interested in, because you've had some ties to the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, and that's another big video game franchise.
Mm-hmm.
I guess because you were Big the Cat and you were Omega in Sonic Heroes, and I guess I'm very curious about that. How did you get both for the one game? Because you were already Big, I knew, from Sonic Adventure.
Uh-huh. Well, that was kind of an interesting story, too. So we go back again to casting director Lonnie Manella here in San Diego.
Right.
Who, as I recall, called me one afternoon on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, I think it was. And she said, hey, got a voice job for you, another video game. Can you be in this studio in Kearney Mesa on Saturday at 11 a.m.? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. You're going to send me the sides so I can audition? She goes, you don't need to audition. I'm just going to put you in a role. Okay, fine. So I get down there and I walk in and I see some of my friends like Ryan Drummond, who is the voice of Sonic. He was in the studio when I came in. And Jenny Douliard, who was the voice of Amy Rose. And so, anyway, I see all of these different voice actor friends of mine from San Diego who are in the game and they're recording. And Lonnie takes a break about 5 minutes after I'm in the building and walks out and shows me a picture of Big the Cat. And she goes, this is the character you're going to do. And I said, what the hell is that? She said, that's Big the Cat. And I went, yeah, he's big, all right. Looks like a big, fat, stupid cat. She goes, that's exactly right. And I'm going to need you to do a stupid voice for him. Okay. So about 15 minutes later, it's my turn to get into the booth. And they've got the director from Japan on the line, from Tokyo on the line. And I walked in, and Lonnie goes, just read a couple of lines, just do a stupid-sounding voice. I went, and I thought, okay, I'm going to be really stupid here, and they're gonna hate this. Where's my froggy? You don't look so good, little buddy. Have you seen my froggy? And apparently the director from Tokyo thought that was perfect, exactly what they wanted. And I'm like, no, I can do something better. I was just messing with you. And they're like, oh, no, that voice, that's good. That voice we want. And so that's how Big the Cat came about. And fans have loved rubbing that in my face all these years. Some of them misconstrue. They think that I don't like Big the Cat. I have no problem with the character at all. I hated the voice I did for Big the Cat. And the fact that I was screwing around doing something really stupid sounding, I thought there's no way they're going to take this. And they did. So I should have started with something better. But that was a fun little role. And then the Omega 123, that's not acting, that's just reading. I don't think there's anything special about that character at all. It's a robot with a mono-inflective voice. So everything he said was just like this. There's no acting. I'm just reading the words off the page in this voice like this with no emotion whatsoever. And so that just happened because Lonnie knew that I could just do like a robot voice with absolutely monotone, no pitch change whatsoever. And so that was like a bonus they threw in after I finished recording Big the Cat, which took, I don't know, maybe an hour of recording. She said, oh, we also have this robot character. Can you do your robot voice and let them hear you in Tokyo? And I went, okay, this is my robot voice. It does not modulate. I simply speak like this all the time. And they loved it. They said, okay, that's perfect. And so that's how that role was put together.
I mean, I've heard stories like that where some people are like, well, how'd you get those two other roles? And I'm like, oh, they just gave them to me. Like, I don't know. I just always find that really funny when I hear some actors be like, oh, they just gave it to me. Like,
yeah, there's always some incidental roles or what they'll say additional voices or whatsoever. And every once in a while, one of those additional voices will turn out to be a character that people seem to like the Omega 123 character. I guess people seem to like that character, and it was just really an additional voice role for me. And it didn't pay any extra except for the extra hour in the studio to record his lines. So why not?
Right, yeah. Well, and it's so interesting to see how some of those characters have changed over the years. They don't use Big as much anymore, but it's things like in the comics, because those characters have changed so much with how they've established them in the comics. And well, now Omega's gone from being just a robot to being, I think, oh god, in the comics he's like he's a homicidal nutcase robot. Basically.
Oh, dude, there's the role I want right there. Yeah.
Well, yeah, like he still talks like a robot, but he has a strong like a bloodlust, and that's the whole joke of the character is that he's just obsessed with anarchy in the comics.
Yeah. Gotta love that.
But I guess another thing I did see when I was looking into you for research to the interview, I saw singing was actually something that was part of your repertoire.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm a karaoke master. I love singing. I used to back in the day in radio a good 20 years ago. I sold a lot of jingles, so I would write and sing and produce jingles for different advertisers, and that's really what got me into that. And now I just love singing. Anytime I can do a parody song or sing something and show off, I do my best.
Right, yeah, and was that something that was that an interest at the time you were doing radio, like when you were starting out, or was that something that came like later when you started doing stuff like that?
Um, Around the 80s, here's how that really happened was I don't know if you're familiar with the Dr. Demento show.
Oh yeah, that was I believe that was Weird Al's
Yeah,
inspiration.
as a matter of fact, Weird Al and I met and started doing parody songs about the same time.
Wow.
The difference is that Weird Al had Rick Derringer as his producer, and he was in L.A. and had access to high quality recording studios and writers, producers. Meanwhile, I was just a morning radio DJ on Cape Cod, and my advantage over a lot of others was that back then there was no karaoke. You couldn't buy a karaoke disc, for instance, to
Right.
have background music. But I'm a musician, and I took a liking to MIDI music early on, and I bought a bunch of equipment back in the early '80s so that I could start creating my own music because I liked writing music. But as a radio DJ, when I got a wild hair up my ass and decided I wanted to do a parody song, I could play all of the parts, put in the drums and the bass, the strings, the piano, the horns. I could play all of those parts separately on my keyboard in MIDI and create the music and then sing it. So I ended up getting on the Dr. Demento show 5 or 6 times
Wow.
back in the day. And that really inspired me and got me started. That's what got me a job in New Orleans from a small town in Cape Cod. I ended up down in New Orleans doing afternoons and being their production director because they wanted me to do these parody songs. And that took me to a morning radio job in Birmingham, Alabama, and then Mobile, Alabama, because they liked that I could do these, parody songs and create them, from scratch within a day. I could make a song that sounded very much like the original. And then that took me to Philadelphia because the program director there went, God, this guy can produce frickin' anything. And he's the only guy I know who's making parody songs all by himself. And so my career kind of took off because of the singing and such. And then that led to making jingles, as I mentioned before, for clients. And so singing came about because of my radio career in that fashion.
Are there like albums or anything that you've made like with your parody songs, or were they all like little short things that have you like compiled any of them together?
You know what? It's a shame that I didn't take more of an interest of saving all of that. I have a few of them that were digitized back in the 90s when I still had the original master reel-to-reel tapes that were 4, 8, or 16 track tapes. And I took the time to digitize a bunch of them, but most of them were lost to time because, back in the 80s and early 90s, we didn't have digital. We only had tape, and recording tape breaks down after a few years, and it's no good anymore unless it's stored in perfect conditions. My tapes were not stored in perfect conditions, and they literally fell apart. So a lot of my early work is gone forever. And what I regret the most is my early air checks. Which is, recordings of your radio show, just the talk bits.
Yeah.
That I don't have any of those from back in the day when I was young. I would love to be able to hear those again, because mostly of the silly things that got me fired when I was, a teenager and in my 20s, and doing radio in, the Bible Belt in Virginia and North Carolina. And, getting fired for silly things I said on the radio. I wish I had the air checks of those breaks I did that got me fired, because they were really funny, I thought.
Do you have like a memory of what any of them were? Like, or at
Oh, my
least-
God, yes, I know them all. Hell, I must have been fired 15, 16 times from radio jobs because of something I said that I thought was very clever. For instance, I was on a radio station in Norfolk, Virginia, WNOR FM 99, which was FM 99, the album rock station for Tidewater, right? And I talk like this. And one Friday night, it was my job I was on from 6 to midnight was my shift. And from 11:30 to midnight, I would do half an album, an album side.
Right.
And the album side that I did on that particular Friday that I was fired was Hot Blooded by Foreigner.
Right.
And so the last track wrapped up, and I went, FM 99, that's Foreigner, with our album side tonight, Foreigner, huh? Yeah, well, I'd be lucky to get two in her. But next time, we're going to play something from... Yeah. And so the next day, I get a phone call from the program director who says, hey, come on down. And I'm coming down to the station, and my FCC license and my final check are taped to the control room door.
Ooh.
And so, a bunch of little comments that were blue comments like that I thought couldn't hurt anybody. Children don't get it, and adults will find it funny. And so I'd play like Come Together by the Beatles and say, hey, there's a good trick if you can do it. And in the Bible Belt, they don't take to that kind of thing. This is before Howard Stern kind of paved the way for blue humor and suggestive stuff. But this was before his time. So I was just this radical, they didn't call me a shock jock, just inappropriate.
Was it just like the one joke that you did, or did you like do jokes like that every so often, or like things not as raunchy
I did them
as
all the
that?
time because I thought they were so funny. Just one-liners. Most of them were harmless and not sexually related or anything. Like that U2 song, the most recent one. The last time I was on a classic rock station here in San Diego, a station called 103.7 The Planet. There's a song by U2, which is something in the way she moves, something like that. And I said, must be all that fiber in her diet. So little things like that nobody even notices that I think was so clever. Those got me in trouble over the years. So yeah, I was fired a lot of times early on in my career because of one-liners I said. And then of course I matured. I grew up and went, I just can't say that kind of thing on the radio anymore. It's inappropriate. I'm not going to do that. And then I just, started writing, fun little commentary, little liners to say in between songs that weren't sexually related whatsoever, and my career was great. I never got fired again, except when they made a format change.
Right? Yeah. Like, how is it that I've never actually fully understood how it like, do you have to come up with stuff like on the spot immediately as a disc jockey, or are there like times where you have to write things down, like just to set things up between songs, things like that?
Well, that's changed dramatically since digital came around. Very few DJs you hear on the air are live. Very few.
Yeah.
Everything's pre-recorded all the time, and so you don't hear mistakes or flubs because it's all pre-recorded. Well, in my day as a baby DJ, back when I was doing these liners, everything was totally, completely live. Hell, I was playing records, literally dropping the needle on the record.
Right, yeah.
Or playing songs off tape, and you had to do it all on the fly. I made up everything as I went. It was a real art form back then, just like production was a real art form back then. When I had to use a razor blade and splice tape to cut things together and layer audio over and over and over again to get the desired effect, where in today's world with digital, any trained monkey can make sound, and can edit stuff. But no, back in the day, in the 70s and 80s, all the way up until about 1992 or 93, when digital came out in radio broadcast, everything had to be done live, and I had to make up whatever breaks I was doing as I went. There is some show prep. I mean, I would read the newspaper. I would watch infotainment shows on TV. Entertainment Tonight's been on forever.
Right, yeah.
So just so I knew something about some of the artists and some of the, infotainment news that I could use on the radio, I would prep for my show. But like you said, it was all on the fly. It was live, and you had to be creative on the spot back then.
Was there ever like moments where like you knew the song was about to end and you were like, oh shit, like can't think of shit to say? Like,
oh God, yeah. Oh God, yeah. And then you just give a time check and give the call letters and play the next thing, whatever it is. And you know what? Everybody in radio, Michael, everybody I've ever known in broadcast who did the same thing I did, live radio, has the same nightmare. And that nightmare is, and this is true, we all have these dreams. The record's running out. You have nothing prepared. You don't know what to say. You don't have a song ready to go. You can't just grab any tape and put it in because you're playing a commercial from an advertiser that's not even buying time anymore. And you freak out and you wake up in a cold sweat because you're about to have dead air. Because rule number one in radio broadcasting was no dead air. You've
Right,
got to
yeah.
have something ready at all times.
Well, and I guess it kind of similarly applies to these podcasts because I've talked to people who run podcasts, even a couple of people I've interviewed, and there's always this fear where I've even had a couple interviews like this where the person's just not very talkative and you're afraid you're not going
Hmm.
to get a lot of time out of the interview, so you just start
Uh-huh.
running out of questions. Basically, yeah, no,
I've asked him everything, and he's answered yes or no to everything. God!
basically no, or they only give like two or three sentence answers, like things
Yeah,
like this,
yeah.
not very complicated answers, or they're just not very talkative people. I'm like, this interview can't be 18 minutes. It's not long
Right,
enough.
right.
Yeah,
And then
no.
on the other side of the coin, you have assholes like me who won't shut the hell up for you to get to the next question. I try not to do that, but I can't help it.
Oh no, I mean I've had interviews on here. I had one interview, a friend of mine, Dave. That interview ran almost 2 hours long, and that's a great interview. But
Hmm.
I felt bad for my editor when I gave him the file. So I
And
was
asked
just
him to cut it down to an hour.
well, I edit, like, for the people who don't know that are listening, I edit all the audio myself, and then I hand the stuff over to another person who basically makes the video look pretty and adds like a few digital effects to the actual video
Right.
itself so it looks better. And I
Yeah.
feel bad because I'm like, hi, here's this 2 GB file that you're going to have to render yourself.
Have fun with it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I feel bad. I feel bad sometimes with shit like that. Like, it's just like, I always try to keep it at least under an hour, but there's just been the occasional person where they go a little too far with the talking. And I'm not against that at all.
Yeah.
I'm not remotely
They
against.
get off on a tangent and,
Yeah,
and just run
yeah.
with it. Yeah.
Well, because I can be if I gel really well with a person, I can be a really bad tangent person too. Is the other thing. So I guess
Yeah.
it's also just the product of two evils. If we're both tangent people,
Exactly.
I guess with well, I mean, even talking about the DJ stuff, I remember I've seen movies like even from like the 80s and 90s where they do. I don't even know when did the digital stuff start becoming more recurring, where nothing was really recorded live. Was that like mid 2000s? Was that like late?
Oh, no, no. No, about mid 90s
Oh,
that
really?
started. Yeah, yeah. We had digital delivery systems that came out in the late 90s, like Enco's DAD system and Audio Vault, a bunch of different programs that allowed for all digital delivery where you could pre-record everything and nobody was live much at all after that happened. I mean, today it's the worst ever. In fact, DJs in your town are probably out here in Los Angeles or Dallas, Texas, or Chicago. They don't even live where you do, but they're giving the forecast there, aren't they? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I guess with the amount of DJing you've done, because it seems from what I was looking at when I was looking into you, it seems you've DJ'd in so many different states and so many different locations over like 30, 40 plus years. And
Yeah.
I guess what's it like having to go between so many different DJing jobs?
Gosh, that's so long ago now. It's kind of hard to remember. But the first couple of times I got fired from a radio job for something I said, it hurt. I think I cried the first time because I really loved the job, and I was worried about whether I'd get work again. But I had talent, so I was never more than 2 days away from the next radio job. Every time I'd get fired, I'd get a new one. And when it meant moving, I saw that as an adventure each time. In the early days, it was just me and my little dog. And if I got fired or got a better offer, which was often the case too, I'd just get an offer from another radio station in another city to move there. It was an adventure, and I enjoyed it. But after I had kids, got married, and had children, didn't want to move anymore,
Right,
and it
yeah.
became really difficult. In fact, when I bought my first house here in San Diego, it was only 2 months after I bought that house that the new director who came in fired me just so he could hire his buddy to be the production director.
Oh, that sucks.
And just after I bought that house,
Oh.
and that really hurt. I ended up having to take a job in Phoenix And I left my family in San Diego, and I would travel back and forth from Phoenix to San Diego every weekend. The good thing about that was back in the day, Southwest Airlines, I could fly round trip for $75. So so it was not a bad thing. But I missed out on seeing my kids for 2 years, when they were very little, because of the silliness of the radio career, where if they change a format or if a new company comes in and buys the radio station, I was out on my ass. Which, by the way, I have one of the most unique stories about that. I don't know if you've ever heard of Clear Channel.
No, I have not.
Okay, they're now called iHeartRadio. I'm sure you've heard of them.
Wow, I've heard that. Yeah. Wow.
Okay, well, they changed their name to iHeart to try to help fix their terrible PR problem. Because Clear Channel, which was originally the evil empire known as J-Corps, and their slogan was "the noise you can't ignore," if that tells you anything. This company, Clear Channel, they fired me 5 times, though I was only employed by them once.
How did you get? I don't even understand
how does that happen.
Works.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a job here in San Diego that I love. I came from Philadelphia to San Diego, and I'm working for a company called Gannett. They still own a bunch of newspapers, but they used to also own radio stations. Well, J-Corps, who just changed their name to Clear Channel, decided they were going to buy up all of those Gannett radio stations, 17 of them at once. So they buy them all, and they fire everybody who's at the top of the salary chain in every market. Now, being a department head as production director, I was fired. So I had to take that job in Phoenix. So I go out there, and I work for them, for a company called Chancellor. And a year and a half into that, guess who bought that company? And I'm fired again. Then I get my dream job back in San Diego for Nationwide Broadcasting. Same company that has the insurance company, Nationwide Insurance.
Yeah.
And that was the dream job for me. It was the best radio job I ever had in state-of-the-art studios. But 1 year into that, they also had 16 or 17 radio stations in their group. Guess who bought them?
Oh, God.
And they fired me for a 3rd time. And at this point, I'm like, God, if you can't beat them, join them. So I took a job in Los Angeles for a company called AM/FM Broadcasting. And less than a year into that job, Clear Channel bought all of their stations, and I'm fired again.
Oh, my God.
And at this point, that's 4 times. And so I just waited for a Clear Channel production director job to open, and one did at the famous Kiss FM and Mega 92.3. So this is a 2 FM station combo where Rick Dees was the morning guy.
Right, yeah.
And we had our morning guy. We had Sinbad for a while, the comedian, and we had George Lopez.
Wow.
So I produced all of the comedy bits for George Lopez, and I was the commercial production director too. And this was Clear Channel, so now I'm working for them. Okay, 2 years into that job on a Friday afternoon, the company comptroller, this guy named Jim, calls me and Ron Shapiro, who's the imaging director, into his office Friday at 5 p.m. That can only mean one thing. And we get into his office, and he goes, well, we're downsizing again, going to have to let somebody go. And I put my hand in the air, and he goes, why are you raising your hand? I said, make it me. and Ron Shapiro, the other guy, looks at me, and he goes, why would you do that? And I said, well, you're born and raised in Los Angeles. I'd rather be back in San Diego, and I hate this fucking company. I said, give me an 8-month severance package, and I will walk out the door today and never come back. And they gave me an 8-month severance package, and I came back down to San Diego. And so there you go. That was the 5th time I was fired by Clear Channel, though I was only employed by them 1 time. God. And because of their business tactics and the way they operate, you can now understand why they changed their name to iHeartRadio.
God, that's like have you ever heard about the WWE, like the shit about like back in the 80s and 90s, how they basically bought out like every single small town wrestling company to the point that now there's like no other competition, basically.
Oh yeah.
Like,
it's sad, and it's the same kind of thing with radio broadcasters like Clear Channel or Tegna or Viacom or Cumulus, where these big companies bought up all the mom and pop radio stations. So that's why every radio station across the country pretty much sounds the same. format to format. I mean, classic rock station in Cincinnati sounds identical to the classic rock station in Portland. Why? It's the same company. They even have the same damn DJs, and they're playing all the same exact records. And it just, there's no competition, so they can sound like crap and still win.
God, that's so crazy to me when I hear about shit like that. Like a company that just buys out every single individual business or shit like that.
And it's sad, too, that there are some businesses that should... Oh, deregulation was the word that I was searching for. Bill Clinton deregulated ownership laws in the FCC, and that's why you had Clear Channel and Viacom and CBS, these companies coming in and buying up all the radio stations. But where deregulation really should happen and has not is in cable companies. I mean, the fiber optics and the cable that runs to your house, it's been underground. It's been there for years and years and years and years. Please allow there to be competition between the cable companies for those lines so that, for instance, where I live and where you live, who's your cable provider? Do you have cable?
No, and I don't know. I want to say it's Comcast, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, yeah, it may be. For me, where I live in Southern California, it's Cox Communications, and I have no other choice unless I want to go to AT&T and use their dish or whatever satellite. But for cable specifically, I should be able to choose between Cox or Spectrum or Comcast or Time Warner. I should be able to pick, but no, they've never deregulated those companies. So that, Cox owns the cable coming to my house. They don't have to share it with anybody else. That needs to change so that we have real free market competition between cable companies and we can drive those prices down.
Right, yeah.
You're going to edit all this boring shit out of the interview. I know you are. I know you are. Yeah, St. John went off on a rant about cable companies.
But I got to say, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, sure. Did I answer enough video game questions? Because I know I kind of went off on rants on radio and cable there. I didn't intend to.
I think it led to interesting conversation. I don't know a lot about radio, so I think it actually made it very interesting conversation to have.
Well, I can say this. One final point on radio. I do see light at the end of the tunnel. I see a day when mom and pop radio stations will come back. I see that happening in the next 5 years. Because it's already gotten to a point where a lot of signals are going dark. In other words, like Clear Channel or iHeart, whatever you want to call them, are already turning stations off because they're not turning a profit and they don't have any listenership, and they're letting them go silent, and because there's no value to them anymore. And as they have to begin selling off their stations, mom and pops will come back around again, and we might get some really cool radio stations with very unique sound in the next 5 to 7 years is my guess. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Do you have any, actually, before we stop, do you have any advice for people that are interested in getting into voiceover?
Yeah. First thing is to take acting classes, because it's not just about having a great voice, it's knowing how to use it. And it's not even that much about having a great voice as it is having a great ear. If a director says, I want it to sound like this, you have to know how to make the voice sound that way. Do you need more texture? Do you need more air? Do you need a higher pitch, a lower pitch? Do you need more inflection, less inflection? And that all comes from experience in acting. So if you want to be a voice actor, get the actor part done first. Don't worry so much about what your voice quality is, because if you're a really good voice actor or a really good actor to start with and you have the chops, then it doesn't matter if you have a great voice or not, as long as you know how to use it.